Picture this. The year is 1687, and you're standing in the most magnificent ballroom Europe has ever seen. Candlelight dances across golden walls, musicians fill the air with elegant melodies. Men and women draped in silk and diamonds glide across polished marble floors. And then you notice it. That smell. Sharp, unmistakable, growing stronger with every breath. You glance around, searching for the source, but everyone continues as if nothing is wrong. A duchess fans herself more vigorously. A duke adjusts his perfumed handkerchief. And there, near the velvet curtains, a nobleman discreetly steps away from a dark, spreading stain on his breeches. The music plays on. No one says a word. Welcome to Versailles, the palace where beauty and horror learned to waltz together. This isn't a story about architecture or kings, though both play their parts. This is about what happens when humanity's grandest ambitions collide with its most basic needs. It's about the price of perfection, the cost of appearance, and how the world's most beautiful palace became its most repulsive prison. Before we go deeper into this world of contradictions, I want to invite you to join our community. If stories like this fascinate you, if you love uncovering the hidden truths behind history's glossy surface, then subscribe and stay with us. Drop a comment about what surprises you most, and like this video to help others discover these untold stories. Now, let's step through those golden gates and discover what really happened inside. The dream began with a single man's obsession. Louis XIV didn't just want to be King of France. He wanted to be the sun itself, the center around which all of Europe revolved. In 1661, he found his canvas, a modest hunting lodge southwest of Paris. What he imagined there would change the face of monarchy forever. "Build me something the world has never seen," he commanded his architects, and they did. For over 2 decades, an army of workers transformed swampland into paradise. They carved gardens from wilderness, erected wings of marble and gold, and created halls so dazzling that foreign ambassadors wept at their beauty. Every detail screamed magnificence, every surface reflected power. But in their rush toward grandeur, they forgot something fundamental. People are not ornaments. They eat, they sleep, they sweat, and yes, they need somewhere to relieve themselves. On May 6, 1682, the Sun King made his announcement. The court would leave Paris and move permanently to Versailles. Imagine the excitement. Thousands of nobles packed their finest clothes, their jewelry, their servants. They arrived expecting paradise. What they found was something different. 20,000 people. That's how many souls suddenly occupied a space designed for perhaps a tenth of that number. 20,000 bodies, breathing, moving, living within those golden walls, and not a single proper toilet among them. At first, the nobles laughed it off. Surely this was temporary. The king would address it. Workers would install facilities. But weeks became months, and months became years, and the truth settled in like fog. Nobody was coming to fix this. The most powerful people in France, living in the most expensive building ever constructed, had nowhere to perform the most basic human function. So they improvised. Behind every tapestry, you might find evidence of desperation. Every shadowed alcove, every quiet corridor, every turn of the grand staircase became a potential latrine. The gardens, those legendary masterpieces designed by André Le Nôtre, transformed into open-air bathrooms where noble lords and ladies squatted among the roses when no one was looking. Winter made everything worse. When snow covered the grounds and ice glazed the windows, no one wanted to venture outside into the biting cold. So they stayed inside. And inside, the problem multiplied. By January of 1683, the smell had become so overwhelming that incense burners were placed in every corridor, not for ambiance, but for survival. Lady Elizabeth Charlotte, the Duchess of Orleans, wrote letters that still exist today, preserved in French archives. In one, she describes walking through the Hall of Mirrors only to nearly slip in human waste. Another letter mentions how she could no longer wear light-colored gowns because the hems would inevitably drag through filth. Her words paint a picture no tourist brochure ever will. Think about the mourning ritual, the levée du roi, when hundreds of nobles crowded into the king's bedroom to watch him wake and dress. This was considered the highest honor in France. But imagine the reality. Hundreds of unwashed bodies pressed together in a closed room, the air thick with the smells of perfume, desperately fighting a losing battle against body odor, waste, and decay. The privilege of proximity came at a cost few wanted to acknowledge. Food itself became dangerous. The palace kitchens sat far from the dining halls, connected by long corridors that doubled as improvised latrines. Servants carrying dishes to the king's table would navigate paths slick with filth. Food arrived contaminated, sickness spread. Still, no one spoke of it openly. The women suffered most acutely. Court fashion demanded impossible standards. Dresses were architectural marvels, layer upon layer of fabric held together by whalebone corsets and steel frames. Removing such a costume could take an hour with multiple servants. So when nature called, many women simply waited and waited. And when they couldn't wait any longer, they endured the humiliation of ruined garments hidden beneath perfume-soaked petticoats. Chronic urinary infections plagued the ladies of Versailles. Kidney problems, skin conditions from constant contact with soiled clothing. But to complain meant admitting weakness. And weakness had no place in the Sun King's court. Medical records from the period reveal something chilling. Life expectancy at Versailles was actually lower than in Paris's poorest districts. The very wealthy, surrounded by gold and silk, died younger than beggars in the street. Disease didn't care about nobility. In 1689, dysentery swept through the palace like wildfire, killing nobles and servants alike. Doctors knew the cause, the unsanitary conditions, but the king refused to acknowledge it. Instead, he ordered more perfume. Perfume became Versailles' true currency. Not gold, not titles, but scent. The wealthy bathed themselves in rosewater, lavender oil, and musk. They carried pomanders filled with cloves and cinnamon. Rooms were fumigated constantly with burning herbs. An entire industry arose to supply the palace's desperate need to mask its own smell.
But here's what's remarkable. Despite everything, nobody left. The discomfort, the illness, the daily degradation, none of it mattered enough to make nobles abandon the court. Why? Because Versailles wasn't just a palace. It was power made visible. To live there meant you existed in the king's orbit. To leave meant exile, obscurity, irrelevance. So they stayed. They endured. They pretended. As decades passed and Louis XIV aged, the situation didn't improve. His successor, Louis XV, made token efforts. In 1728, a handful of private latrines were constructed, but only for the royal family and their immediate circle. Everyone else continued to suffer. This created a new hierarchy, a sanitary aristocracy, where bathroom access became another symbol of favor and rank. Foreign visitors noticed what residents tried to ignore. The British ambassador wrote to London, describing Versailles as a golden sewer where France's finest pretend not to notice the stench of their own decay. Such reports damaged France's reputation across Europe. The palace meant to showcase French superiority instead became a punchline, proof that wealth couldn't buy common sense. One incident in particular became legend. Madame de Pompadour, the king's powerful mistress, was ascending the grand staircase during a formal reception attended by ambassadors from Spain, Austria, and Russia. Mid-step, her white silk shoe plunged into something soft and unspeakable. The ambassadors saw. The courtiers saw. Madame de Pompadour, to her credit, didn't scream. She simply lifted her ruined shoe, continued upward with perfect grace, and never mentioned it again. But the damage was done. That single moment captured everything wrong with Versailles. Beauty and filth occupying the same space, nobility literally stepping in waste while pretending nothing was amiss. The palace responded not by installing bathrooms, but by banning white shoes. Let that sink in. Rather than fix the problem, they adjusted etiquette to accommodate it. Dark shoes wouldn't show stains. Problem solved. This was Versailles in miniature. Appearances managed, reality ignored. By the time Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette took the throne in the 1770s, Versailles housed nearly 30,000 people. 30,000. A small city crammed into a building never meant to hold a fraction of that number. The infrastructure, already inadequate in 1682, was now catastrophically overwhelmed. Marie Antoinette tried. History remembers her for many things, most of them unfair, but she genuinely attempted to address the sanitation crisis. She ordered private bathrooms built in certain wings. She established cleanliness rules for the staff. She even commissioned a revolutionary indoor plumbing system for her personal quarters. But her efforts backfired. To the starving citizens of France, the Queen's luxurious bathtubs and perfumed baths seemed like obscene extravagance. Revolutionary pamphlets seized on it. While the people had no bread, the Queen had golden faucets. The attempt to improve conditions at Versailles became more evidence of aristocratic excess. Outside the palace walls, anger was building. France was bankrupt, harvests had failed, and people were hungry. And there, visible from Paris, sat Versailles, monument to a system that spent fortunes on marble floors it couldn't even keep clean. The palace became a metaphor. Revolutionary writers called it a perfumed corpse, beautiful on the surface, rotting underneath. The filth wasn't just physical, they argued. It represented moral corruption, political decay, the rot at the heart of monarchy itself. When the revolution finally came in 1789, the mob that marched to Versailles came looking for more than bread. They came to tear down a symbol. And when they stormed through those golden gates, what they found confirmed every suspicion. The revolutionaries expected opulence. They found it. But they also found waste packed into corners, stains on priceless tapestries, and a smell so overpowering that many covered their faces. They discovered a palace that, despite its beauty, was fundamentally uninhabitable. In October 1789, the royal family was forced to leave Versailles forever. They returned to Paris as prisoners, and the palace, the great symbol of absolute monarchy, sat empty. Workers arrived to clean it. What they discovered shocked even them. Decades of accumulated waste had to be physically removed. Walls had absorbed odors so deeply they had to be stripped and replastered. Wooden floors were unsalvageable and had to be torn out entirely. The cleanup took months and filled carts with literal tons of human waste. Think about that. The most magnificent building in European history required a decontamination effort just to make it safe for human habitation. Over time, Versailles transformed. No longer a royal residence, it became a museum, a monument to a fallen regime. The 19th century saw it restored, polished, sanitized. The smell was scrubbed away, the stains removed, the evidence erased. Today, millions visit Versailles every year. They photograph the Hall of Mirrors, stroll through the gardens, and imagine what it must have been like to live in such splendor. What they're seeing is a fiction, a cleaned-up version that bears little resemblance to the reality of court life. The Versailles we visit today is not the Versailles of Louis XIV or Marie Antoinette. It's a ghost, sanitized and safe, stripped of the smells and suffering that defined it. Only documents remain to tell the truth, letters and diaries and medical records that preserve what restoration erased. So what should we take from this? What does Versailles teach us? First, that appearance and reality are not the same thing. A palace can be beautiful and brutal simultaneously. Gold doesn't guarantee dignity. Marble doesn't mean civilization. Second, that basic needs matter more than grand gestures. All the chandeliers in the world mean nothing if people have nowhere to relieve themselves. True civilization isn't measured in gold ceilings, but in access to clean water, functioning sanitation, and basic human dignity.
Third, that power without responsibility creates monsters. Louis XIV had absolute authority to build whatever he wanted, but no obligation to ensure it functioned. He could command marble palaces but not address their most fundamental flaws. That disconnect between power and accountability defined Versailles and ultimately doomed the monarchy. The women of Versailles especially deserve remembering. Behind every magnificent portrait of a lady in silk and pearls lies a story of hidden suffering, chronic infections, painful illnesses, daily humiliation. They were ornaments in someone else's fantasy, beautiful objects denied the basic dignity of a private, clean place to attend to their needs. Their struggles remind us that luxury without dignity isn't luxury at all. It's cruelty dressed in silk. Perhaps most importantly, Versailles shows us that no amount of perfume can cover the smell of neglect. Louis XIV believed he could overwhelm reality with spectacle. He was wrong. Eventually, the truth asserts itself. The beautiful lie gives way to the ugly fact. When revolutionaries ransacked Versailles, they weren't just attacking a building, they were repudiating an entire system that prioritized appearance over substance, that valued its own reflection more than the welfare of its people. The palace's sanitary nightmare became the perfect metaphor, a ruling class so disconnected from reality that it literally lived in its own waste while pretending everything was fine. There's a broader lesson here about human nature and power. We build monuments to ourselves, trying to create something permanent, something that will outlast us. Louis XIV certainly succeeded. Versailles endures, but not as he intended. He wanted to be remembered as the Sun King, radiant and supreme. Instead, Versailles became a cautionary tale about vanity, about what happens when ambition exceeds wisdom, when vision lacks compassion. The palace stands today as both wonder and warning. Wonder at what human hands can create, warning about what human pride can ignore. Every tour guide who walks visitors through the Hall of Mirrors is telling only half the story. The other half, the true half, is written in documents tourists never see. It's preserved in the complaints of duchesses, the reports of doctors, the scandalized letters of ambassadors who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. That hidden history matters because it reveals something essential. Greatness isn't about how things look, it's about how they work. A society that creates beauty while ignoring suffering isn't advanced, it's delusional. Versailles was delusional in the most literal sense. It believed its own propaganda. It mistook decoration for substance, and it paid the price. The French Revolution swept away more than a monarchy. It demolished the idea that spectacle could substitute for governance, that appearance mattered more than reality. In a sense, the smell of Versailles helped bring down the old regime. When people could no longer ignore the rot behind the gold, when the metaphor became too obvious to dismiss, change became inevitable. So when you see pictures of Versailles today, gleaming and pristine in the sunlight, remember what those images don't show. Remember the stench that once filled those halls. Remember the nobles who suffered in silence. Remember the servants who cleaned up after them. Remember the women whose health was destroyed by fashion and lack of basic facilities. Remember that this beautiful place was also a prison, a nightmare disguised as a dream. Versailles will always be magnificent, but it will always be a monument to failure, proof that even absolute power cannot overcome its own blindness. The Sun King built something eternal, but eternity remembers everything, not just the parts we want to show. The golden walls still stand, the gardens still bloom, and somewhere in those polished halls, if you know where to look, you can still find traces of truth. Small irregularities in the walls where stains were scrubbed away, sections of flooring that don't quite match the rest, corners that were rebuilt because the original stone was too damaged to save. These are Versailles' real legacy, not the beauty, but the scars,
Not the dream, but the price of the dream. History cleaned up the mess, but it couldn't erase the lesson. When power forgets humanity's basic needs, when appearance matters more than dignity, even paradise becomes hell. The Palace of Versailles endures as testimony to a simple truth. You can build monuments to your own glory. You can cover everything in gold. You can create beauty that takes the breath away. But if you forget that people are more than ornaments, if you ignore their suffering in pursuit of your vision, then your masterpiece becomes your monument to failure. The Sun King wanted immortality. He got it, just not the kind he imagined. Versailles will stand forever, beautiful and terrible, magnificent and monstrous, a golden cage where thousands lived in degradation while pretending to live in paradise. That's the real story of Versailles, not the one in the brochures, not the one in the restoration, but the one in the letters, the diaries, the medical records, the one that smells of desperation beneath the perfume, the one that tells us who we really were when we thought we were at our finest.